Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Scarborough's Conservation Commission meeting. And we're going to, I'm going to welcome Autumn Spear, our planning director, to the meeting, attendance. And then for time purposes, we're going to go straight into Autumn's work with us on the GMO update, and then come back and circle back to other items on the agenda. Autumn needs to leave us shortly before 6:30 to go to the planning board meeting, which is in the other room around there. So Jamie, would you please call?
Sure. I will start in person. Richard.
Here.
Chuck.
Here.
Randy.
Here.
And heading to virtual lands. Marla.
Here.
Noah.
Here, just so you all know, I'm largely going to have my camera off, but I'm here and active. I just got a parent at the same time.
Thank you. Rita.
Here.
Pete.
Here.
Jessica.
Here.
Great. Thank you all.
And we also welcome our new counselor liaison, Karen Shoup. We'll circle back to that shortly. I'd like to start though and do a land acknowledgement before we begin our conversation with Autumn. Just to make an acknowledgement honoring all Indigenous people, the people who came here before us and nurtured this place as stewards of Mother Earth, the first people. I make this acknowledgement aware that this land is unceded and that issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing in the Wabanaki homeland. I acknowledge the Waskawaga people who once lived in what is now Scarborough, and that as we support efforts for land and water protection, we honor the current tribes who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. So thanks again, Autumn, for coming to us. We've had some initial discussion, more than an initial discussion. We've been around on this GMO stuff for a little while, and now we're ready to talk about the next phase, and happy to have you lead us into it. I think because we've been doing this for a while, the commission has some pretty specific thoughts, and we're excited about being invited for additional comment and recommendations. But if you could just tell us the sort of what all is involved and how you're approaching this work.
Okay, great. Thank you, Randy. I'm Autumn Spear. I'm the planning director. For those of you I've not met before, started with the city or the town in August. And so this is our 5th GMO discussion in the last 2 weeks. A few of you have probably already seen it before. In October of this past year, the council put a halt on what is the growth management ordinance process to date and wanted to take a look at it with the goal of April 2023. And so Nick McGee and John Anderson, myself, Karen Martin with FEDCO, and then Tom Hall, town manager, are working on revising the growth management ordinance. The growth management ordinance is just a tool that we have sort of in our toolbox, but it works with the comp plan, it works with our zoning map, it works with subdivision ordinance and site plan ordinance. So it's one of many items that we use as a town to control growth or to control the pace of growth. So through this process, we're reaching out to the different boards and committees that the town has, and we're also reaching out to developers in the very near future, trying to get some input into what everyone has. And so what I've tasked myself with for the most part is to go to the different groups and to get from your perspective as the Conservation Commission, the answers to these questions. And I believe you all received the questions in advance. And I'm very limited on time because I have planning board at 6:30, but there's also a link that I will be happy to make sure Jamie has to send to you, that you can answer on your own as time allows, and then we can bring it all together and work with the chair, Randy, to make sure that there's one cohesive response. But that might be easier if we find that we're running out of time.
Okay,
for the answers.
And then just what's the timeline for this respond?
So we're asking that all of the responses be in by December 23rd.
Okay,
So that's the goal. We're coming up on Christmas pretty quick.
Yeah.
So I know that is, might be a challenge, but that's the goal. And I think if we're a little bit late, that's okay. But I think that's one reason we made the link for the automated survey. It's really easy
Okay.
to do on your own spare time. So if you'll go to, let's see, couple of slides in.
sure. So for those of you joining online, we can't see you right now. I think Jamie
I
can.
can.
You're raising your hand, but we can't see you. So we're following along on this presentation with you.
So in the survey document that some of you have in front of you, and then some of you have in your agenda packet, it's just a summary of the existing ordinance. The ordinance itself was 7 or 8 pages long, and there's a little bit more detail, but it essentially has 3 parts. The annual allocation, exemptions, and then an exemption process. And so the questions, there's 8 questions. They're geared in line with these 3 parts, and then some overall arching principles for the committees that we meet with. So the next slide talks about the specifics, and I'm gonna go really fast, so feel free to stop me at any time and ask me for some clarification. The annual allocation, that is really the magic 144 number that we have right now. And it has some parameters around it. So you can have no more than 30 permits in the rural districts. And these rural districts are primarily west of the turnpike. So they're the RF, the rural farming, and then the rural farming manufacturing districts. And there's also a rule about common schemes. So no more than 20% of the total permits are allowed in a common scheme. And these are on an annual basis. And then no more than 30% can be in the Crossroads Plan District, which is the Downs on an annual basis. So this is the annual allocation, and it's just a flat number. It's 144. And every 2 years, the way the ordinance is written now, the council addresses where we are in that 144, and then we increase it 5%. So that's what the ordinance says now. The exemptions as the second part, and some of these are very straightforward. All repair and replacement units. So if my home were to burn down or be destroyed in a storm, I could replace it, and I don't have to worry about getting a growth permit. I would just go get my residential building permit. All affordable housing units are exempt right now. And so this is a good exemption, I think, as far as the comp plan is concerned. It's one of the goals of the comp plan to increase affordable housing. Manufactured housing in a licensed community are exempt. And then this one is an interesting one. It's up to 100 one-bedroom multifamily units under 750 square feet. So, and the idea of this is that the 1-bedroom multifamily units have lesser impact on cities or town services and schools. And there's a time frame on this one for December 31st, 2024.
This is like,
This,
this is like an apartment building with a bunch of
yes,
1-bedroom.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So instead of having, so
Right,
they
okay.
would take one out of the 144,
Okay.
but if you had 21 units, you would not have to go against
Got it.
that.
Is that per year?
These, the way this one's written, it's a 2-year, it's 12/31/2024. So this
Okay.
has a deadline.
Okay, so it's 100 units for that by 12/31/2024, and then the next one specifies per year. Okay.
Right, that one and then the last one they have time frames on them. But the up to 10 workforce housing units, that's per year. So the repair and replacement, the affordable, and then the up to 10 housing, workforce housing is per year. The last one is 289 mixed use or multifamily, and that's in the Crossroads Plan Development, the Downs. And that one has a time frame as well. So this is the way the ordinance was essentially changed in October to allow for the Downs to continue with a reasonable pace of development, but also understanding that the town wanted to relook at this ordinance and how it moves forward. So the
How
last-
is affordable housing defined?
It's up to 80% of the average median income. So it's defined, but it's not currently deed restricted in perpetuity or for a time frame. So that's one of the things we're looking at. That first blush is affordable, but then it may not be from there on out.
And workforce housing?
It's 120 of, what's it, AMI?
Yeah.
It's 120%, and it's defined in the ordinance as well. And those are pretty recent definitions that the town created.
Okay,
And Noah has his hand
okay,
up as
thank
well.
you.
Noah?
Thanks for those definitions. Under those definitions, can those units be any size?
Yes, there's no limit.
Coco says thank you.
So then the last part of the GMO, the way it's framed, is the exemption process. And this is the process that the Downs found themselves in the last, 10 to 12 months, was that there's a special process written in. If the units are within the designated growth area, it's part of mixed use or multifamily, and it provides a public benefit, it can go through an exemption process through town council. And this is, there's some questions around this, and I think this committee especially has some input onto what public benefit is. I think that's been one of the hardest things to define from everyone's perspective, is what is public benefit? So in a very quick manner, that's how the GMO is framed up right now, those three general areas. So then we'll get right into the questions. And these first two don't have so much to do with the GMO, but it has to do with residential units. And again, you put your conservation sort of hats on as you answer these. I know transportation has, it's hard to take out school impact, it's hard to take out road impact, but really thinking about this from a conservation standpoint. Does the number of new residential units constructed each year directly affect your group and actions? And if yes, how? Well, that's question one. I know it does. So it's the second part, really. I think that is where we're really looking for input.
Do you want to go question by question?
I can do it however, whatever you think is easiest.
I have not gone through the form, so
Okay.
does the form require question by question responses?
It does, but you can just say NA if you move
Okay.
on. Yeah.
And my sense is these questions came up as a way to generate discussion, to get at issues that were important to committees, boards, and commissions.
Yeah.
So it's not so much like our response has to be to each of these questions, but to the generally this exemption process and the GMO.
These two, it's sort of a mix, because I really want you to look at, if you go to question number 3, it starts talking about this existing GMO, this 144, number.
Okay.
And you might find that what aspects of the GMO annual allocation believe work well and why not. You might not care as a commission about 144 limit. What you might care more about is the 30 permits in the rural districts. That might be more important because that allows you to conserve more land on the west side of the turnpike.
Okay.
So, and I'm not trying to put words in
Right.
your, but that's kind of, it is good, I think, to think about each one. But I believe you probably will find that you have more input into different sections of it, especially the third part of the
Okay.
GMO. But that's how the questions are framed up. Just in general, how do residential units affect you? Does multifamily versus single family affect this committee's decision-making differently? And then we get into the 3 parts that the growth management ordinance is written. And then public benefits, what that is. And then the last question is really about overarching principles that you all try to use when making decisions. So almost the mission statement of your
Okay.
your commission, so you can really what you consider when something comes before you. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? What is your main thing that you're looking for in making that choice?
Okay.
So, yeah, it takes a bit of time for
Well,
sure.
I think,
He has his hand up.
okay, Pete, go ahead. I have a general comment about.
Yeah,
this
just
process.
really quickly, how did the number 144 come up? Is it 144 times 2.5, which is the average number of people per household, equals a certain number of people
No,
that raises the population of Scarborough, or how did we come up with that?
the state statute, the 144 number is the last 10 years average for growth permits. And so every 2 years you do a new average. If you want to do growth permits or residential units, but that's what it is. It's just the prior 10-year average.
Okay, thank you.
Jessica also has her.
Jessica.
So does that mean that the exemptions that are granted will go into the next 10 years average?
That's a great question, because there's actually two different numbers, right? So there's the number of growth permits issued each year. So let's say we use them all and there's 144, but you could also have unlimited, say if you had 100 affordable units for units. So you might end up with 300 units per year, but only 144 growth permits. So through this process, we're looking at both numbers to really figure out what makes sense. Does it make sense? Sometimes I feel like it would be easier if we had a growth permit requirement for everything, but have a bigger number. So at least we're being honest about what we're getting. Because I think sometimes when you mix the two, you don't get the full picture. You're like, oh, just 144 units, but how did that 200 unit apartment complex happen, right? And it's because of the exemptions. So that's part of the discussion, and that may be part of Bill's responses to
Mhm.
say it's not clear. It can be a little bit confusing or conflicting. Again, not to put words in your mouth, but those are definitely some things we're considering. So when we're revising this.
Noah?
So I know that this GMO is specifically about residential units. Is there a separate rule or document for commercial development in the town?
So commercial development is based on the zoning, and then the comp plan is sort of the umbrella for the whole town, right? And so the comp plan guides us in our principles, and then we have the zoning map, which is what is permitted where, commercial and residential. And then the growth management ordinance is the limitations on residential. And then we also have commercial design standards, and that tells you how the commercial needs to look. And so, and then the subdivision ordinance is another tool, and that tells you how the lots need to be subdivided. But there is no limit on commercial development. And there's no statute really that allows that, because that's really how you're paying for your improvements in the town.
When you say
Single-
statute, there's no state level statute?
Not other than your zoning ordinance and your comprehensive plan. So you can limit commercial development through zoning. So if we were to rezone the entire, town to rural farming, then there you go. I mean, that would be very extreme, and I'm not sure you could even do that, but that's what you limit your commercial with, is through zoning, impact fees, and all of those other things.
So the reason I'm asking this is because these numbers, I think to Pete's end, the numbers are a little hard to put in context without understanding the overall picture of development across town. So for example, if commercial development was 20 times the scale of housing development, then this is somewhat of a different conversation. If commercial development is, half of housing development, then that's also a different conversation. And I don't know if there's any way to actually capture that or not. Sorry, my daughter keeps dropping a pencil.
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, the innovation district at the Downs is a really good example of the commercial development is outpacing residential. But I don't have the percentages with me. But yeah, it's definitely something to think about. And looking at the zoning map too is important. you know, because the whole town, when we're doing this process, I've got some big maps that we're talking about. The whole town doesn't allow everything. And so it's really, that zoning map is a huge tool, Noah, for how things can happen and where.
I think, it's gonna be really useful and helpful to have, a discussion with you more broadly in January. When you're coming to our commission meeting. And I think that's sort of the challenge. At least from what I could see around commenting on this exemption process is the things that generally the Conservation Commission wants to see in town. We want to see in town, not limited necessarily to what comes under the growth management ordinance. But so there are these broad sort of principles that we'd like to have this process taken to account. And then also explore ways that we can do it in other, where we see other gaps or what's missing
Right.
in zoning and other ordinances. So, and then I also understand that what would be really helpful is to have some sort of prioritization from our commission around what we want to see. Like, if we're going to ask for 10 things, let's really focus on one or two priorities
Right.
for us.
Focus. Yeah, and I think the important thing too, for you guys to consider as you do this work is, so the comp plan has this idea that we're preserving the rural farmland and we're preserving the marsh and we're taking care of those things. And we're doing that through focusing growth on these targeted areas, right? So, and I think, sometimes you can feel like you're not seeing your results because you're seeing perhaps growth in this area, but this growth in this area enables these other results. And so it's really it's a big picture. And I think that's what's been really helpful for me, especially getting to talk with all the different groups and commissions, is how to put the whole picture together. You know, because transportation wants sidewalks and bike and ped and an arterial network, and zoning says these things happen. You guys want to conserve land, parks wants recreation facilities. So really, it's all this big picture, and that's why I'm a planner, because it's fun. But trying to, and so I would encourage you, and we can talk much more in January. You know, really, when you're thinking about this, it's like that trade-off. You know, you give this over here, so you get this over here. And that level of importance, I think, is always good to consider. And I'm hoping that we have in January, an overarching sort of comp plan discussion with the council and some of the councilors too, so we can trickle down some of those goals, and so they all do feed together. So I kind of look at them as, you know, this umbrella of the comp plan and rain's trickling off in different buckets, right? And it's just filling up all these things. And if you have one too full, this one's empty. And so there's that balance. And that's what I see, long range and, you know, just in planning in general is trying to maintain.
So we've got transportations, looking at those pieces, sustainability, I would assume is looking at like building envelope, stormwater management kind of things. And what is the big gap in all of our ordinances is, or I shouldn't say all, but the big gap that I see is there's nothing that says contiguous land conserved. Except for maybe the conservation subdivision.
Yeah.
So would something like a conservation subdivision, could we say any exemption would be, you can get an exemption if you're doing a conservation subdivision?
Sure. Yeah, you could definitely put something like that, you know, if, I think that would be a totally appropriate sort of answer to those questions. Yeah. And the public benefit, you know, if you can, do we care how many permits there are in a year if we get all these things, right? Like, what's that balance from a conservation standpoint? Like, do you care if it's 20 or 30 if you get these things? So it's trying to figure out what's important from a a commission and committee group and trying to find that balance. And it's a really good, I'm excited to be part of it, because I think this GMO discussion is gonna be, I don't know, I think it'll take in a lot more into account, I think, thinking about it this way. I like the approach a lot. I think we're getting some really good input.
Good. You have like 3 more minutes. This is good for us to discuss, but are there other questions? Oh,
Public ask
yes, the
questions.
public may ask.
I'm just curious, in the 144 number now moving forward. The new state law about auxiliary structures, is that gonna be included in the 144 of those exempt?
Those would be exempt. Yeah, the LD 2003, so the accessory dwelling units that will go into effect in July. Yeah, it's another thing we have to look at, right? Because your density can go up 2.5 times. So it's definitely something, but those would be exempt. Yeah. We allow accessory units now, and they're exempt from it as well. They have some different performance standards than what will be required in July. So it'll be a little different than what we have now, but
So the state has it in its climate action plan. The feds have said that this is a local and regional issue. Would something like the commission would prioritize in the exemption process consideration of conserving 30% of land that you're going to be building on as contiguous space? In consideration for this, would something like that?
yes,
be-
definitely
Okay.
public benefit, yeah. I like to think of it too, is I'm not sure if this whole rate of growth state law is gonna maintain itself, right? So they've talked about doing away with it in the last legislation, and it may go away, and so I would like for the town ideally to sort of catch up to that moment where if that does go away, and we're using this GMO as the pace of growth kind of checkpoint, if you will. Like, okay, so it's not overwhelming, but while we still have that, let's catch up with all of our other ordinances and all the other things that we're trying to put into place. And so if that were to go away, we no longer have to rely on it. Right? So we're ready.
Okay,
And so this discussion has been really good, I think, for us also to find those gaps and to talk about those other ordinances that need to be prioritized and brought up to the top to get us ready to where if we didn't have this, what would we have? And it may be that we're in better shape without this if we get the other things in place. So that's part of it as well.
other questions? From folks? So, we will discuss this as a commission tonight, for a little bit more, but then. And we'll probably have, what I'm thinking about is we'll have a commission, submission to the forum, but, you welcome individual. Contributions, and you're gonna be willing to sort of compile all of these.
I'll work with Jamie and
Okay,
you.
yeah. And then any sort of questions,
Yeah.
further conversation, Jamie's able to field or whatnot.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Sorry for the very rush
No, thanks for
presentation.
making it possible. Yeah.
30 minutes.
I talk really fast.
Thank you. Let's see. Let's keep going on that, and then when we finish talking about this, we'll go back to voting on the minutes and going through the rest of the agenda. And I'll welcome.
And Noah just put his hand up.
Oh.
That's not.
Oh, okay. Noah?
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on your comment, Jamie. I'm sorry, Randy. About talking about contiguous land and 30%. And within that context, I guess I really want us to think broadly in that if everything that's built conserves 30% of their land, that is, of course, a positive net addition to our goal of reaching 30%, but that doesn't help add to the deficit. And so some parcels have to be beyond 30% in order to add basically backfill from what has been missed in the past. And there's lots of creative ways to do that, but I just want us to think broadly on there's a lot of tools that can be used in the toolkit in conservation, and there's carrots that can be offered with things like this. So anyway, I just want to
Thank you.
put that out.
Yeah, important to keep in mind, and also, I mean, we have something, we don't even have a requirement, or do we? Something like, no, we don't even have a requirement right now, Noah. So 30% would be great, at least on this minimal or the small piece of what's happening in terms of development and growth in town. But, would love to hear other creative solutions to get beyond the 30%. Knowing that this GMO has a major impact, but it's one piece of the big pictures, as Autumn was sort of describing. So separately, and we didn't include it in public documents yet because it's still a draft. I circulated, or Jamie circulated, or I did, I don't remember. An initial draft comments on what might be conservation guidelines for this document. I did get some, I'm hoping that you all had a chance to go through that if you have comments. I did get some initial comments that it all looks great. It's a lot we need to whittle down to a priority instead of so that we position ourselves with the greatest chance of reception from what we're going to be submitting. So I'm wondering if
Pete also has his hand up.
great. Hi, Pete. Go ahead.
Hi. I guess my comment builds a little bit on what Noah started and also gets at maybe what we consider public benefit, but we also want to make sure we differentiate what we mean by conserved land. Open space with trails to me is very, very different than what we consider conserved land with possibly no public access that has significant benefits to the public, and the fact that it creates a buffer that increases water quality, et cetera, or creates contiguous habitat around key areas like the Nonsuch River, et cetera. So as we work through that, we want to keep those concepts kind of in the back of our heads, which just kind of complicates things. But I think it's important to make sure we discern between what open space is, which could be a ball field possibly, versus what we consider conserved lands also. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I add to that just?
Yeah.
As looking at landscape ecology, not all land is created equal. And one of the things that the land trust and the town have wrestled with in the past is how developers protect the open space that they have to do in subdivisions. And if you look at our conserved and public lands map, you'll see these thin little strips in a lot of places. And that's conserved land. Now, for the most part, it doesn't get monitored, it doesn't get enforced, and it backs up on someone's backyard that adds it to their yard and mows it and uses it for their shed and refuge pile and whatever. In my mind, that's not open space. That is not connecting the dots. That's not making wildlife corridors. That's not, how I like to think of open space as our lungs. I mean, it's the air we breathe, and the rivers and streams are blood vessels. And I mean, basically, when we protect open space like that, we're cutting them, we're cutting into them. And I don't think that's what we want to do to our lungs and our blood vessels.
Thank you. I was just running through this draft because I may have been using words verbally interchangeably, but I felt like there were spaces where I was really, where that was being described in that way. And where open space is one thing with public access and conserved land is something else. And then again, making the point that it's not as beneficial to protect this little bit over here and this little bit over here and this little bit over here and call it 3 acres of protected land when there are 3 acres that aren't next to each other. So I want to review this again carefully for that. And if you see the space where that's not being defined carefully, let me know. But it's important for our decision makers, our town councilors, to understand the distinction for sure. And members of the planning board, it would be important for them to understand the distinction. Yet our ordinances, and certainly the growth management ordinance, doesn't take that into account at all. So there's no rule that says that this needs to happen right now. What else on this, folks? So there's going to be they're collecting feedback by December 23rd. I thought that we would do a response as a commission. And then you heard they're welcoming individual responses as well. I'd like to be able to use the conservation guidelines as the base of that and welcome direct comments on that. And then sort of like a thumbs up from you all about whether that's a direction you all feel comfortable going.
So Randy, would you be taking the lead on compiling the responses based on what you've already pulled together for the growth
Yes.
management? Okay.
Yeah.
And commission, is that something that you're comfortable with?
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think so.
Fine by me.
Go ahead. Oh, fine by you.
So is this something, Randy, that you would want to kind of pull together draft responses to and circulate to the group? Or, and this is open for everyone to kind of weigh in on just the process for how this feedback is submitted to Autumn. So either, what I see is either y'all are putting it in Randy's capable hands to take what she's already provided, and we can kind of have more of a discussion on tonight if people want to populate the responses directly into the survey form, or I can send a Word document out or share a Word document just with the questions themselves that responses can be typed into, and once there's some agreement, they can be formally submitted to Autumn.
Jessica? Thanks, Jamie.
I was wondering if we wanted to do a Google Doc or something like that, because I think that because we want to be so careful of the language, that open space is not created equal, and we're talking about high quality habitat and watershed protection and things like that, that I don't know that we could get all of that language nailed down in a single meeting. And then I also just wanted to mention that I have submitted my responses separately for myself personally through the Parks and Land Conservation Board request.
Great. So I thank you, Jessica, and I think Noah did the same. So I'll just share it right now. I have it in a Google Doc, so I'll share it with you all after this meeting. So you can just go right straight in and make comments there.
And I can share out the specific questions as well, if everyone,
Okay.
if I think that might be easier for at least submitting them to Autumn. If there's a document that has, I can basically send out what was included in the packet as a Google Doc so that people can work right within one document.
All right, I am going to say, that my preference is, or my, I would say comfort level in communicating what it is that we want to see doesn't neatly fit into responding to each one of these questions. So I don't see that this thing is going to be divided into answering these questions. I think the committee or the counselors who are leading this would be, you know, would also benefit just from having our general thoughts. So, and then I don't know, maybe I could invite Karen, if you have any, you haven't raised your hand yet, but I wonder if you have any additional thoughts or guidance for us at this point.
Well, no, I think your last comment was really good, because even if you don't think it applies to specifically what your board does, I mean, you guys are residents, and I'm not sure this is going out to all the residents individually, but we're kind of hitting all the residents through these boards. So even if you don't think it specifically applies to your commission, I mean, again, we encourage people to fill it out individually as well. But if your board has a consensus about something, I mean, you guys obviously have a different train of thought and different mindset, I think. And so I'd say do it if you can.
Yeah, my thought was for the questions that do lend themselves to what you've already pulled together for the conservation guidelines for the GMO. Insert those into the form, but you can definitely provide the document separately to
Okay.
Autumn and
Oh, great.
the counselors for the areas where it just doesn't fit, like the thoughts don't fit the guidelines that they've pulled together for or the questions that they've pulled together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, any more thoughts on this? Thank you all.
So just to be clear, a Google Doc that you prepared, Randy, with some initial answers to spur discussion is going to be shared, and we're going to work from that, correct? We're not, it's not a blank Google Doc.
It is, no, it is not.
Good. Great.
But I am also going to share a Google Doc of the questions from Autumn that went out in the packet for this meeting, just the standard GMO questions that the committees have been asked to respond to. And so some of the information that is in the document that Randy pulled together will feed into those questions, and where there's overlap, answers should be provided within the GMO questions.
Jamie, aren't those questions already in our packet and in a list that we can already look at? And then aren't those the questions that Randy's going to be using?
Yeah, I just didn't know if people wanted to put specific language within answers within the questions. So that Randy isn't necessarily teasing it out from the document that she's pulled together. So if people have specific thoughts, whatever's easiest for the commission, I'm fine with. And so if it's easier just to review.
Yeah, I thought that's what the Google Doc was for. Sorry, I might be just misinterpreting.
You'll get a Google Doc to edit, yeah, and we'll probably drop some questions into it.
Okay.
It'll be one big Google Doc.
All right.
We'll sort it out from there. Okay, let's go back to item 3 under call to order, voting on the minutes from our last meeting.
I make a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting, which again, were awesome.
Yes.
Thank you, Pete. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Chuck. All right, roll call. Chuck,
Yes.
Randy,
Yes.
Rita,
Yes.
Marla,
Yes.
Pete,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
Noah.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, so we've already touched on the GMO revision and that process. We're going to talk about chair and vice chair. We've got a great report out from the education subcommittee. We're gonna look at what is our role around land use generally and start to think about how we create goals for 2023. And there's going to be a little bit of an update, maybe discussion around Sustainable Scarborough Day. We'll hear from Pete and Jamie around the update on the SMPDC Coastal Resiliency Plan, and then gets our general updates. And yeah, and then this will be our last meeting of the calendar year. We're not going to sneak another one in before the end of this month. So are there any comments or questions before we go ahead? So we're going to do electing a chair and vice chair discussion, but just generally as we're talking about this, we had a recent town election. The council elected a new chair who is John Anderson. And then John Anderson appointed new liaisons to different committees and boards. And so April Seither is no longer our liaison. We're welcoming Karen Shoup, new town councilor, to be our liaison now. And I think Karen is also liaison to the planning board and the land board as well. Is that correct? Yes, great. So we welcome her there. We've also had a resignation from our commission based on the end of a term. And then we also have other applications to the commission, but Chuck is completing his wonderful years on the Conservation Commission. We hope you come back, but this is your last formal meeting. Do you have any other things that you want to say about your time?
Well, it's been outstanding. I've learned a lot, and hope I've made some contribution. And I'm so impressed with the development of the commission, the progress and the professionalism that it's taken on, and the leadership. And I'm absolutely certain that the person who replaces me will do a better job than me.
Ah.
So it's good.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Chuck, for your many years on the commission and keeping us, as we've heard from other members, keeping us on task around the critical issue around climate change and making sure that we keep that foremost in our minds as we're doing our work. And we appreciate you continuing to remind us of that. And you're welcome to come to any meeting. Yeah, good. Any other comments or thanks from the peanut gallery there on the screen or others?
What is the succession going to look like?
Succession.
Who takes my place?
Oh, okay. So nobody can take your place, Chuck.
Oh, geez.
But we've had a few applications to the Conservation Commission, and the Appointments Committee met last Monday and made some recommendations. They don't get formalized until it goes before council, and council approves it and they get sworn in. So we've had the first alternate member be recommended by the Appointments Committee to become a full voting member, and that's Jessica Sargent. So we hope to welcome her as an official voting member of the commission in our next round. And that moves Dick up from second to first alternate. And then we are waiting to hear about other movements. There's nothing new to announce at this time. We are currently fully formed as a 7-member voting commission. And then, unless there's this mass exodus, that I don't know about. We're still very confident we're going to be meeting quorum in future meetings. So there might be some new movement and shifts and changes in January, but we need to wait for the appointments committee and the council to go through their work.
And there was a recommendation for a new second alternate, I believe.
Oh, yes, so, from the appointments committee, which is Maggie Vishnu, who some of you met at the last meeting. She was sorry she couldn't attend with us tonight, but she would be the second alternate. Thank you.
So that all goes to council on December 21st to be
Oh, wow.
confirmed.
Great.
How can that be so quick after previous turnovers took?
That is an excellent question, Chuck. This one is a pretty straightforward. It wasn't a merger, fortunately. It was just kind of appointments, so a little more straightforward.
And I think it's going to be a really exciting year for conservation. Generally, lots of opportunity for us, as I understand the council as a whole is going to be prioritizing conservation and developing goals that help to advance our principles. So it's exciting time to be on the council commission or be a friend of the commission. And to be in Scarborough as we're trying to move this forward. So we're going to elect so my commitment is that we have annual elections of chair and vice chair. We don't have a vice chair currently. We're welcome to accepting nominations from the floor for chair or vice chair. I would like to continue as chair if you all would like me to continue in that role, but let's have nominations or however we want to move forward on this process. Oh, Emily.
I think we should formally nominate you, Randy, to be chair. Once again, you've done a fabulous job. Thank you.
Thank you. I accept. No.
I second that. I second that.
Third.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any nominations for vice chair? Less enthusiasm for vice chair than there was for chair.
Is there anybody who would like to be the vice chair?
Marla, your hand's up. Are you?
Her hand went down.
I did
So-
not mean to do that. No, I cannot be
So
vice
sweet.
chair at this time.
I
I'm just.
didn't know if you had something you wanted to say.
No, but I am very grateful for Randy and her leadership. I think it's been great. And I do want to say that if things change in January when the town council votes on the appointments, I mean, we could have somebody else who might like to be in that position. So if it's not decided tonight, it could be decided in January or February next year.
Yeah, so the rules don't require us to have a vice chair in place. It would be good. So if you all are okay, we can put that off to January or February and like Marla's saying, see how things shape up and encourage everyone to continue thinking about whether that sounds like a role you'd be interested in. And then we can circle back to that in the new year.
Sure. All right, so I guess we need a motion to, Jess.
What does the vice chair do? What is vice chair? I know, I mean, Randy's so capable and Jamie, you're wonderful at together moving us forward and getting out these agendas and all these materials. What would be the role of a vice chair?
That's an excellent question because we've never had a vice chair. So we put this in when our charge was updated to merge with the Pest Management Advisory Committee. And really the thought was that the vice chair would serve as chair if the chair is not able to attend a meeting. So I think that that's the primary responsibility. I think it wouldn't be a bad thing to have the vice chair in the loop on kind of like, agenda development and things like that, and provide that feedback. So if at the last minute the chair isn't able to attend, the vice chair has that level of knowledge for, to run the meeting and know what to expect. But at this point, since we haven't had a vice chair, I think the commitment is fairly minimal.
Or, yeah, minimal or as much as.
Or
they'd
as
like
much
to
as you
take
want
on.
to do.
Because if, you know, this is gonna be a new year, there's gonna be a new focus on conservation, energy, lots of attention on this commission. It would really help to have another sort of co-leader taking on a little bit more and sharing in moving things forward. So it could either be a role where you know, if the chair can't serve in that way, then the vice chair steps in, or it could be like two people, you know, really moving things forward with everybody else. Kind of splitting work
Yeah.
up.
So it's an opportunity, I guess, to kind of like formulate or design what the vice chair actually does, since like I said, we haven't done it in the past.
Randy, you're so organized. Have you already written a job description?
No,
Details of what that person will do?
no. All right, so.
All right, so do we have a formal motion to name Randy as chair
I so move.
in a second? In a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, sorry.
Thanks, Pete.
Sorry, I was muted.
All right, and roll call. Chuck,
Yes.
Randy,
Yes. Thank you.
Marla,
Yes.
Rita,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
Pete,
Yes.
Noah.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Let's go to the report out from the Education Subcommittee, which had, which did a report from the last meeting. And then with our notes for this meeting, the written report came out. So would the Education Subcommittee like to expand on the written report, or maybe give us a little of a preview on what's to come in the first quarter or so of the year?
I would just mention that I have put out a recent email to the Land Trust ED and head of our CEO committee, and you, Randy, and Marla, and myself, and Emily, to meet hopefully the first or second week in January to discuss collaborative efforts for programming and events. Just wanted to be sure that we had a good early start so that we can begin to put together our 2023 sort of communication report or plan.
That's great. And it sounds like it'll be early January, so that at our January meeting, we'll hear a lot more.
Hopefully, yes.
Potentially, we meet early in January, it's just because January
Right.
starts
Here.
on a.
What is
so
the date of
The 9th.
the
9th?
9th, January 9th,
Okay.
so.
We are now talking about the 5th, so we will see if that's amenable to others, but that's the date that seems to be most popular at the moment.
And everyone's welcome.
Mhm.
Anything else under old business? I'd like to move us to new business, so our role around looking at land use, and so I've been having a couple different discussions around you know, sort of lots of opportunity on our plate. We want to be able to put together, look at the map of Scarborough and really this next year start to prioritize what pieces that we're really interested in protecting, given a number of different layers that we have available from GIS. I've talked with a couple of you about perhaps developing a story map to to look at, what the situation is, the current status is in Scarborough, and as a way to communicate to the public what it is we're looking at and sort of engage them in terms of what it is we want to protect. And then we also are starting to tease out what's our role vis-a-vis the land board and the council in terms of recommending land use generally. So that's a lot for this group, but I just wanted, and not to mention the potential of us also taking on an open space plan at some point. The last one having been done in 1990, somewhere between 96 and 99. Dick Harvey contributed to that back then. 23 years is a long time to go without an updated open space plan. So that's a lot on that. I welcome comments on sort of teasing this out from Jamie or Todd.
So, yeah, I had suggested, I mean, it's kind of two different things, looking at kind of priority, they're related but different, priority areas for conservation, and then also an open space plan. So, Randy suggested it would be really helpful for the commission to have a map to identify where those priority areas for conservation are, and thinking in terms of what is currently conserved. So looking at the town's map and the land trust's map for conserved areas, and overlaying, beginning with habitat data to look at where the high value habitat or priority areas from the Maine Natural Areas Program, maybe to help us kind of zero in on where those areas or what parcels the town would be likely to prioritize for conservation. And having that information, sharing that information with the planning board, I think would be really helpful, so that when they get proposed development in front of them, knowing kind of where these priority areas that were identified by the Conservation Commission would probably be helpful for them as part of their review process. And then, yeah, in terms of an open space plan, that's going to take into effect both conserved lands, but then also recreational opportunities and existing and potential features. So that may play into the Parks and Open Space Master Plan, or Parks and Rec Master Plan that that Community Services is wrapping up currently. Yeah, Todd, go ahead.
Just to piggyback on Jamie, but also what someone else said earlier. I do like the idea of defining, so everybody completely understands when we start having these conversations around conserved land versus open space and rec, just so people have an idea when we start talking about percentage. I also wanted to share a comment that was brought forward in our Parks and Conservation Land Board meeting. Two things from there, and Noah and Jessica were there, so they can feel free to chime in. But we're not looking at our assessment tool per se. We're going to be looking at our process to make sure it's meeting the goals of today. And so one thing that was made very clear to me is that the job of the Parks and Conservation Land Board is strictly to assess a property that's brought to us, not to reach out and find them, or not to go looking for them, if you will. It's more about being totally unbiased and evaluate a property based on the new standards, if we up with the existing tool or if we make any modifications. So really a lot of feedback is going to be needed to come from council for guidance, but two, from conservation and other user groups to say, these are the new priorities we have in town. And if we then have to go back and relook at our tool to say, and I'm totally making this number up, but if a large point scoring opportunity was for, say, a 300 or above acre parcel, in today's climate, a 20-acre parcel that has connectivity to an existing parcel that does preservation and conservation and provides connectivity may be way more important to us as a town versus that large tract. Not saying that large tract is not important, but how are we considering those opportunities individually? And then the last thing, and I'm trying to give it some more thought, one of our members, we were talking about the open space plan, and one of our members made mention to how contentious the open space plan was back in 1998, 1999, when it was formed. And so I just want to give this board and any board, that's going to be involved in that, I just think we need to be really clear and do a great public outreach to say, hey, what we're doing, why we're doing it. I think, and just kind of summarizing it, was like a lot of people thought, you've targeted my piece of property, I'm not giving it to you, and so we don't want to have that aspect when we're trying to big picture things and then focus down. So just want to make sure we're kind of not making that same mistake publicly as we might have made back then. So just my feedback.
Thanks, Todd. Jessica, and then Pete.
Well, and I wanted to echo, I do think that the mapping exercise of, prioritization and making sure it matches with community goals is really important. I think it's also really important, the messaging around that, how it's displayed, the colors we use, because this is not unique to Scarborough, pretty much any community, if your land is highlighted, there's going to be some fears around that. And I think that we need to be sensitive that this isn't, this is willing sellers, no taking, that sort of thing. I think it's a very valuable and important exercise, but I think there's a public messaging and education piece around any maps that are created that are new.
Thank you. Pete, and then Emily.
I agree with everything that's said. I want to go back to some of the previous efforts that the commission has done over the years and just make sure we revisit those. One was the transfer of development rights document. And then also as part of that, there was, I don't know if it still exists anywhere, but there was a GIS analysis done for large parcels that would be the sending areas, which was mostly west of the turnpike. So somewhere there's a database of a list of GIS of those parcels already, and all of those property owners actually were mailed a TDR brochure with an explanation of the program. So we may have something to start with for the open space thing, in addition to some of the other things we have. The other thing that came to mind was, it's about 10 years ago, we looked at a bunch of about 6 or 7 municipally owned properties that are in kind of unique areas, mostly around, well, some of them were around the Scarborough Marsh system. A couple were more inland, but we kind of did an analysis of those in terms of what should be done with them. But one thing that was never done was what language was actually looked at as to what protections those parcels actually had, if any. Were they just town of Scarborough owned? Were there conservation easements placed upon them? Was anything else done with them? So we might want to revisit those 6 or 7 and take a look at that a little bit closer as part of this effort as well. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Pete, would you be willing to help in that regard, just sort of really looking into all those different points that you've been involved in the past?
Yeah, and I'll see what I can find. And I know I have the list of parcels and a memo that we drafted to council. I don't know if I don't think I have a database of all the parcels that were identified as part of the TDR effort. That was Jay Chase and whoever else was the GIS manager at the time, which I don't even remember who it was, to be honest. So we might be starting from scratch there.
Do you know if it was male or female, the GIS person? That'll help me narrow it down.
Honestly, Jamie, I don't.
Was it
That's
Steve
okay.
Buckley or the person before him?
Yeah, I was
think it
thinking
was
Amy
before
Mountain or
Steve.
Steve. So Amy Mountain then. So I'll have to check with Stephen to see, and Micah to see if they have access to that.
Anyway, something I can also look a little bit into, but if I have at least a list, I think I may have a spreadsheet somewhere. So I'll dig into those two things.
Oh, Emily and then Dick and then Marla.
Thank you, Randy. So this isn't what I was going to say, but Pete, I got so excited when you said that there were municipal plots that have already been identified that I just wanted to say, if there's low-hanging fruit that we can look at, and the municipal plots seem like that to me, that would be a great place to start. So that was just really exciting, and diverted my attention from what I was really going to say, which was that it would be so amazing if we could educate the public so that they felt like by having their land identified as potential for conservation, that was more valuable. That was seen as, wow, I have really special property. Wow, this is amazing. And I think that's possible. I think it's possible for us to put together a good education campaign that would help people understand how special their property is if we're identifying it. It's just, we have to be so careful in the way that we put that out there. But if, obviously I have a conservation mindset, but if someone told me that my land was perfect for conservation, I'd be excited. So how do we share that with others so they don't feel like we want to take their land, but that makes their land even more valuable?
Great, Emily, thanks. Dick?
Oh, I had a question for Pete.
Oh, yeah.
I know you guys did a lot of work in the past on the conservation lands map. And so when you're talking about parcels that you didn't get to, that could be included as you work along that process. It could be included in the conservation lands map and updating it. Am I correct?
Which conservation lands map are you referring to? The land trusts map? Or the one that's on, because there are a couple different ones. The land trust has their own map, and then there's the town in its GIS viewer has conserved lands, which includes not only the land trust lands, but some other lands and other things there.
Yeah,
Part of the comp plan too, I
I'm
think.
referring to the towns one, the one, it's on a paper copy. I think the town manager gave me a copy a while ago. And it has a lot of conservation lands. And I'm wondering if part of the whole process is a kind of continual updating their conservation lands. And is it actually on the town GIS? I'm not really familiar with that. I've just seen a printed copy.
Yeah, the one that the commission was kind of working on in the spring, there is a layer with conserved lands, and it's called out between the land trust and town-owned lands, which there's the nuance again between open space and conserved lands. It's kind of all categorized as one, and then privately conserved for like through subdivisions and things like that. So there is a layer on the town's GIS that's available to the public that shows kind of the conserved lands and open space.
Just, I just want to correct Pete just a little bit. Sorry, Pete. We work very closely with.
Thank you, please do.
Our conserved, I wouldn't call it our conserved and public lands map because we work with Micah, we work with the planning department. We share that data with them. So we are updating that again in 2023, and we'll work with the town on updating that map. And we've been working with Micah to really delve into some of the conserved lands and what that means. Some of them are marked as conserved, but we didn't know exactly why. And so, we're trying to figure out some of those pieces. And then of course the homeowners association properties, and they're supposed to be conserved. And then there's the town properties, which the town knows where their properties are, but they don't have them regimented in terms of, there are no specifically parcels in the town database. They're just town owned lands. And so I think that's a big point where I think this commission could definitely help the town try to figure out, well, what ones are really meaningful, which ones are meaningful for Parks and Rec, which ones are ones that they're gonna keep for who knows what uses in the future. And we're happy to place conservation easements on those ones that are deemed for conservation to make sure that they permanently stay that way and no council in the future can change that.
Mhm.
So can I ask you a real question?
Of course, yeah.
So will the trails on an individual homeowners association show up? Like, for example, I live in Little Millbrook, and there's a definite trail system there, and it's rather large. Will I show and say there's another development over here, another over here, and down? Will all those trail systems show up on that map?
No, trails are not mapped. And the town, I believe, hasn't mapped trails on any parcels that aren't theirs, and we haven't mapped trails that are on parcels that aren't ours.
So my question is, should we be concerned with getting an understanding where all these trails are?
And that's part of, I believe, what the transportation committee is going to be working on as through their part of their transportation master plan. And I have a little bit of an update that I was going to share later, but they're also looking into forming an ad hoc subcommittee, looking at trail connectivity and bike and ped issues and things like that, that there may be opportunity for members of this group to participate in.
Okay,
So it's definitely a need, and I think it's something that at this point, the transportation committee is probably best suited to look at the trail network, and there is interest on the transportation committee to do that. But there will be opportunities for.
yeah, but there should be a definite incorporation in the general GIS layer, which shows, or a layer on top of a layer, which be incorporated in the conservation land map. I think those two show up pretty clearly, or people disagree with them.
No, I think that is a need, and I think that the transportation committee is going to, I also recognize that as a need, and it's just a matter of designating someone to do that mapping, because it's going to require field work to go out and GPS all the trails and all of that to get it into the system. So it's going to be a bigger process than just saying that there are trails here, because we need to know exactly.
Well, in other words, when the town accepts a new development, they don't automatically get a layer
No.
from the developer explain.
Yeah.
What?
Well, and
It
sometimes,
should be a given.
well, yeah, but sometimes those trails haven't been developed yet by the time when the subdivision goes in. So there are many, it's a multi-layered process. So yeah, no, we're not necessarily getting a GIS layer of their trail system. I mean, sometimes we're lucky to be getting as-built for some of their infrastructure, and that's really the town's or the planning department's priority, is making sure that we have that information and not necessarily the trail network. That it's great that it's there, but it's not anything that the town is going to be responsible for maintaining.
Town to spend the money to go out and map these trails rather than making it incumbent on the developer to give the information on the trails when they have the final information.
For the existing subdivisions that the town that are old, and yeah, it will be the town's responsibility to go out and collect it. That doesn't mean in the future that we can't have the developers provide that to us. It's just not a current requirement.
Okay, well, I think that's an interesting point, because something should be incorporated there to make it incumbent on them or on the town.
Am I correct in the statement, though, that unless it's specifically called out in the subdivision permit, those trails are not necessarily open to the general public?
Right.
I think that that's true. I don't know how much that's enforced, if people get angry at the general public using those trails. But yeah, I think that that's fair to say that unless it's designated as public access, it's specific for the people that live in that neighborhood.
Which means there can be no real connectivity, because as soon as you get from one development's trails to the next one, you're not going to be able to trespass on their property.
Unless we're able to
Unless it's
secure
open, yeah.
easements.
Okay. Thank you. Let's go to Marlon. I saw Todd also had his hand up, and we are in the room aren't able to read the chat. So Marla?
Okay, thank you. I'll try to make this really quick. I'm just wondering, is the open space plan, is that a goal for 2023, or is that something that is a multi-year project? And I'm also wondering, is this is something that the Land Conservation Subcommittee of the Conservation Commission should take on and perhaps form like a little subcommittee and have like the Friends of Scarborough Marsh and the Scarborough Land Trust and maybe somebody from the Land Bond Board and the Parks and Rec committee, like form a little committee to work on this outside of Conservation Commission meetings. Just a thought, gonna throw it out.
A reaction is that this might be something that we ask council or the town or however this works for some money to hire a consultant to help us with this, as other towns have done before. So thanks for pointing that out. Todd?
Yeah, two things really quick. In the chat, Jessica had dropped in the map, which is outdated for 2012. So she had provided the link there to be able to get to that on the town site for people once this goes live. Anybody that's on Zoom can see it. And I just wanted to reiterate what Andrew was talking about is, all these little parcels in town that are town designated. I think that's a great first step. And at least to kind of start categorizing them a little bit, because then that way it kind of links where are the linkages, what's in it for us to be able to identify a individual parcels. I don't want to say individual again, but individual value, whether it's something we're targeting on the conservation side, whether it's a connectivity piece, whether it benefits a rec or does it have the potential to do multiple things? Is there parcels out there that 2 or 3 things can be accomplished, from a single parcel and providing that value. So I think that's a great first step, because I think there's some of that work that could be done. And I don't want to speak for Councillor Shoup, but we kind of talked about this in the Parks and Land Board too, but I know we're hoping, and the same thing for bringing recommendations to the council and saying like, here's how we think we can tackle this to meet their goals, to kind of help this process along. So there's going to have to be a lot of education along the way, including to the council, what all the committees do, all those roles. And so anything we can provide and shape up ahead of time, always love to provide options where people can digest it versus just having open-ended conversations. That's really hard to educate that way along the way. So just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Todd. And just for a second to go back to Marla's question about the process, I think it seems like something like open space planning would take more than 12 months. And it's not just a consultant, it would definitely involve multiple folks from different committees and interests to be part of that process. But I think it would be expeditious, efficient, and wise to use help of outside counsel to get us to a place that gets us to the finish line of an open space plan for the town. This has been a good discussion, lots of ideas and things, directions to move in. Anything else on this topic before we move on? So the next thing is also around educated citizen stewardship around Sustainable Scarborough Day. And I want to go back to the old business of the education subcommittee and say something that I meant to note, which is that it was after our last meeting, right, that we had the Snug It Up Scarborough workshop, right? And I just want to thank Marla for your coordination of that, and Jamie as well. It was pretty successful. I think if you were tracking, you saw pictures in the Leader and on Facebook for sure. It was very well attended, and there was specific comment from the library about how they'd love to do more of these with us. And they were especially pleased to see the new town councilor, Karen Shoup, there, and would love to see other counselors at future meetings. So I just wanted to recognize the Education Committee for a successful coordinated event. So let's go into Sustainable Scarborough Day.
Sure.
And then roll right into our updates.
Sure. So I don't have a huge update on Sustainable Scarborough Day because the Sustainability Committee unfortunately wasn't able to get to a good discussion at their meeting in November, just because we had a presentation that ran very much over schedule. So there is still interest in moving it forward. We would like to form a planning committee with representatives from Sustainability Committee, Conservation Commission, Project Grace. Steffi Cox is super excited about this idea, and so they want to be involved. The library is definitely interested, and then we have yet to reach out to our community groups, but Scarborough Land Trust is here, so we'll be touching base with them and Friends of Scarborough Marsh and Maine Audubon and all of those groups to try to do a kind of concerted sustainability and conservation themed day. So if there's anyone from this group that's interested in serving on that planning committee, I think we'll start trying to schedule meetings starting obviously in the new year at this point. And a lot of this was generated from the new Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for homeowners to do various efficiency upgrades and electrification in their homes. So that was kind of where it started. And then it kind of evolved into other opportunities where we can fit other conservation and sustainability themes in there, like healthy lawn care and you know, the full gamut. So we kind of need to, we're holding off in getting guidance from Efficiency Maine, because they're the ones that are really looking at the Inflation Reduction Act and understanding what opportunities exist. The federal government still hasn't released their guidance on that. So we're kind of in a holding pattern because we really want to be able to share that information with the general public. But hoping that in January, we'll have some idea of what opportunities will be available, so that we'll be able to have that information, share that information with the public. And so having Efficiency Maine at the event as well to kind of talk about homeowner opportunities and things that people can do over the summer to prepare for another cold winter like we're doing now. So it'll kind of be like Snug It Up, but a much broader program talking about various conservation and sustainability opportunities. So if there's anyone that's interested, let me know. And I will keep you in the loop with kind of scheduling a meeting in the new year to start planning.
Thank you. Sure. Keep on going.
Keep on going. All right. So next update is the Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission's Coastal Resiliency Plan. So Pete and I were at a meeting at the end of October to talk about kind of the next steps for that. So they've gone through a lot of the preliminary analysis and had identified some priority locations from Kittery to Scarborough, where they could essentially, their goal is to develop resiliency plans for 15 or so locations in Southern Maine. And so this workshop that we attended was kind of narrowing down the 40 or so locations that they had identified through their initial analysis to 15 that they will then do in-depth resiliency plans for. The hope is that they would choose locations with areas that have some that are relatable to other areas throughout the communities that are participating in this, so that just because a location, for example, is being a plan is being developed for a location in Wells, maybe it would be transferable to a similar location in Scarborough. So there are actually 2 locations in Scarborough that were identified. The first one was Route 1, where it crosses the marsh at Dunstan River. So we are working with DOT to come up with a resiliency plan for Route 1 in that area. But I think that this is going to look more holistically at both the road and the upland marsh area and things like that. So we'll see. Like I said, they had just identified the location, so we're not quite sure what the strategies and recommendations are going to be yet. And then the other location in Scarborough is Pine Point Road at Jones Creek. So they'll be pulling together a resiliency plan for that location as well. And Pete, feel free to add in if there's anything else that I missed.
Yeah, the only other one was it's kind of like Scarborough / Old Orchard. The beaches along that section of Saco Bay were selected as another site, probably for looking at, potential beach nourishment, dune restoration, and transferable examples for that because of the economic activity and importance of those two areas. And they kind of, straddle that border between Cumberland and York County as well. So that's the only other one.
Great.
Good summary.
So, Pete, do you remember the time frame that they were hoping to have those resiliency plans kind of drafted? I want to say it's probably late this spring.
I don't. I'm looking at the email from Abby right now. Over the next few months, this was early November, project team will be selecting and working with a consulting firm to develop coastal adaptation strategies with a focus on nature-based solutions for the priority areas and visual renderings of selected strategies. So no, nothing on actual time frame beyond in the next couple months.
So as we learn more, we will share more, but at this point, that's the information that we have on that project.
Thank you. Anything else from Sustainability Committee?
No, the one other thing is that the EV charging ordinance is in front of the planning board this evening for a public hearing. So that is scheduled to go back before council for second reading on December 21st.
Okay, thank you. Town Council, Karen?
Sure. Hi, good evening. Thank you. I've officially, I think, been on town council for a month now, so I'm not quite sure I can provide much of an update. But I did want to introduce myself. If anyone hasn't gotten a chance to see the Council Corner article that I read, I encourage you to take a quick peek, so then maybe you'll understand why I'm sitting here tonight. I specifically requested to be the liaison, the Conservation Commission. I've been on the planning board for the last year. Definitely think that there is a lack of conversation going on in the planning level about conserving the environment. And I think I'm here with you guys to see how we can kind of bring it all together. I definitely think there is like a lack of, communication between these boards. So I'm going to be the liaison for you guys, the Conservation Commission. I'm going to be the liaison for the Planning Board as well, and the Parks and Conservation Land Board, and the Community Services and Rec Advisory Board as well. And I know that these boards are all really interested in conservation and a goal of, I know my article mentioned the 30,000 acres by 2030. And I thought it was a good goal to maybe bring up and mention. And I think there is going to be a lot of attention on you guys. And if we continue down this road, I think it's good for you. And I really want to be here, and I want you guys to educate me so I can go back to town council and really represent these goals, and we can all work together. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to working with you guys.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Planning Board?
Unfortunately, I don't have much of a planning board update, other than they're doing several public hearings tonight, including the EV charging ordinance, and then some updates to the zoning ordinance that won't have an impact on conservation. And I am not sure, I believe that the Downs master plan amendment was passed. So they will be moving forward on that. And I just want to reiterate to folks about the Downs and their downtown district development, that they're still going to be subject to all of the town's ordinances. So even though they are able to build out more units than the GMO initially allowed them, they're still gonna have to go through a planning board process. So the sooner this group is able to kind of look at ordinances and identify, and we're gonna have Autumn back here next meeting, so this might be a helpful time to pick her brain, but identify areas where things can be strengthened, requirements can be strengthened to kind of build in more conservation in proposed development will be, I think, beneficial and help this group achieve the goals that have been discussing all night. So I know it helped Sustainability Committee to hear that last month, because they kind of were under the impression that they get to build all of these units, and so it's carte blanche to do whatever they want, but they're still subject to the town's ordinances that are in effect when their development is approved. Their phases of development are approved, so there will still be checks and balances on the development that happens there, and any updates that we're able to move forward, they will be subject to those as well.
Thanks. Transportation Committee, I think you touched on, or?
I did touch on Transportation Committee. They are forming an ad hoc subcommittee to look at trail connectivity. And I also shared the National Park Service Conservation Assistance Program that you talked about at our last meeting,
Yeah.
Randy, and they're really interested in pursuing that to look at, to help do some of this,
Great.
this trail work that we've all been talking about. And so that was just introduced to them at their last meeting, so they haven't had a chance to kind of move forward on that, but I thought I might connect you with Jen Ladd, the chair
Oh,
of
great, okay.
the Transportation Committee. And you guys might be able to chat about ways that our two groups could work together
Okay.
on trail issues.
Nice. And meanwhile, if there's anyone who wants to join the newly forming subcommittee on trails, they're encouraged to do so.
Yeah, so there will be more information to come on the trail subcommittee, because they're still kind of working that out. So I will make sure to keep you all in the loop as opportunity arises for this group to participate in that.
Thank you. And then Parks and Conservation Land Board, we also heard a few updates, but are there other pieces, Jessica or Todd, you want us to hear about? Noah's not on the call anymore. Nothing.
I
Yes?
think Todd did a great job sort of reviewing where we're at. I think one of the big things is we're going to be meeting more frequently and more regularly, so I expect more updates to this group than in the past.
Nice, thank you. Pete?
I guess this is the right time to say, but I just have a follow-up on from our last meeting where Flycatcher gave us information on the Gorham connector and all that. I'm working with the Friends of Scarborough Marsh to get our list of some of our priorities. They're independent of the land trust and things like that, but some of them overlap to Jamie to be able to share with Flycatcher as part of that effort. So just wanted to add that as part of this discussion.
Great.
That's great.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Pete. And I did follow up with them on, and I think I shared with this group in an email, but a couple parcels in the Phillips Brook watershed that they're kind of the two remaining developable parcels in that watershed that would be great to get into conservation, and they are adjacent to existing land trust properties. So it kind of fits their requirements. So if they're able to work with the landowner there, I think that would be a good opportunity as part of that project. But again, as they said in that, when they met with us last month, very early stages, and they kind of need to figure out what their impacts are going to be so that they can pull together their proposed package of conservation and mitigation projects.
And then just before we adjourn, tomorrow is an event hosted by Scarborough Land Trust with an esteemed member of the Conservation Commission as one of the speakers. Would you like to tell us about this event coming up tomorrow evening?
Boy, I think maybe Pete should talk about it more, but I'll talk about it in general. It's tomorrow night at 6 p.m. right next door at the Public Safety Building. It is put on by the Scarborough Land Trust and the Saco Valley Land Trust. I want to make sure I mention them because we had a program down in Saco in November, and this was kind of a two-part series we did. That one looked at forests. This one's going to look at the coast. And this one is kind of interesting because we have both Pete and Jeremy from Maine Coast Heritage Trust. So we're going to kind of get a look at kind of the data and what's happening. And then from kind of Jeremy's perspective of what can we do about it, some of the management considerations. Pete, would you like to add to that?
No, you pretty much nailed it. I'm gonna cover a little bit of the science, some of the stuff that we're using for guidance at the state level, and I have kind of focused it on a kind of a land trust perspective and thinking about ways land trusts can potentially help deal with the issue of rising sea levels. And how some of that information could then also be used to drive some decision making. And then Jeremy Gabrielson from MCHT will really get into that and how they're using that kind of information to drive land acquisition, et cetera. So should be a pretty good tag team.
Nice, thanks.
See you all there.
Yeah, it'll be a great program. Thank you. And then we have a couple of other dates that Jamie provided us with. Any other thoughts for the evening or overtime, but not too much? Thank you all. Okay, so do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
You're here.
I'll
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Happy
And thank you,
holidays.
Chuck.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Everybody.
Happy
Thank you,
holidays.
Chuck.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chuck.
And thanks, Chuck.
Do well. Be
We hope
good
to
and
see
do
you,
well.
Chuck. Don't be a stranger.
Talk to you all soon.